First of all, actually, before I get to the questions, is there anything you'd just like to tell everybody about yourself a little bit, or your work, or anything like that, or shall I go right in? Just make sure you bring it up nice and there you go.
I work in the game industry by day, and I'm a comic artist by night. There's really not much more to say than that. Art is my lifeblood.
Fair enough.
And certain days I do feel burned out, but on the whole, I'd say it's the thing that I enjoy doing most, and if I wasn't getting paid, I'd be doing it anyway. So.
Always know it's a good job when you say that.
Yeah. So it's so much a part of who I am that I can't imagine doing anything else. Yeah.
Very cool. Do you ever, I know a lot of people who are artists, both professionally and just, as something they like to do as a hobby, get into that problem where they get that artist's block sort of thing going on. Do you experience that often? And if you do, how do you cope with it?
I do. A couple of different ways. The first thing I do is when I am in a period where I'm feeling particularly creative, I tend to write things down and plan out ahead, because I know in the future at some point I will not be feeling particularly creative, and so I can go back to my notes and sketches and things and clean them up and actually produce something even when I'm not feeling particularly artistic. And the other thing I do, of course, is go back to sources of inspiration, things that I always find motivating. So old movies and other art books that I enjoy looking through, other artists, things of that nature, sort of propel myself back into the creative jive.
Do you suddenly have any of those moments where just all of a sudden you get this like brilliant idea that just kind of springs in your mind, you have to instantly like write it down or draw?
Sometimes, yeah, I occasionally have woken up from dreams and just had to write something down, and it's turned into a comic strip or something of that nature. Occasionally that happens. I don't know that it would be called brilliant so much as ridiculous, but yes.
So obviously you do the webcomic online, and how did you get started with that, like initially, and is there any like advice you give to somebody who would like want to start one of their own?
I started it thinking I could make a casual side project out of it, but that turned out not to be realistic in the least. It's actually more like a second full-time job. So I'd warn anybody going into it to be prepared to work. It's very rewarding in the end, but it's also it's not something you can just casually do and expect to be able to keep up with it or produce anything significant. All of the writing and web upkeep and art involved is time-consuming.
Because you do pretty much the whole project by yourself, don't you?
Yeah, I have one friend who does some of the back-end work on the website for me, and everything else is my own.
Very neat. Let's see. I guess at this point, that's pretty much all the questions I actually had planned to ask you. I did want to go ahead and let the audience ask some questions if anyone had any questions about the comic or just about Tracey in general. Carter, could you do me a huge favor and grab another wireless mic for me real quick and run for me if you couldn't help it. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Tracey about? Thanks.
What's your favorite movie?
Oh, that's a tough one to answer. I have many favorite movies. I'd say probably the things I giggle at and enjoy the most are old gangster films. Probably not surprising. Things with James Cagney and Edward G. Robinson.
I think that serves some inspiration to the story of Lackidaisy a little bit. Yeah.
I'd say maybe Miller's Crossing, Coen Brothers films.
Oh, yeah.
I tend to quite enjoy.
I have a question. Hi, how you doing?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm fine. What was from when you started until now in your career? What was the most difficult aspect from getting to where you are now?
Probably realizing that you're never quite as good as you think you are, and you need to learn how to take criticism with a certain amount of grace. Jumping from being a student into the game industry, that kind of hit me in the face pretty hard. I think just reality comes in and doesn't
comes in hard.
Doesn't do it politely. It's you kind of 1 minute you're an artist and people online are telling you how good you are and how much they enjoy your work, and then the next minute you're in a conference room with a group of people who are professionals and they're just tearing your work to shreds. So that's probably was rough, but in the end, obviously something I needed and something that has helped me improve and find the motivation to continue looking for ways to improve. So.
Okay, thank you.
Probably the biggest bump in the road along the way.
You mentioned that a lot of your inspiration comes from your own pet cats. Could you tell us like how much they influence this? Is it just their names, or do they have personalities of their own?
It started out at the very basic core level. I think some of the characters are still very much like the cats that they're based on, but of course it obviously expanded out from there. They grew and evolved into their own entities, really. But Calvin is Freckle, better known as Freckle in the comic, is a somewhat has a bit of a schism in his personality, I would say, where he's very mild-mannered at one moment, and the next moment very much the terror. So I think that certainly bled through into the comic. And Rocky is the notorious rover who gets himself into trouble and a little too adventurous for his own good. So yeah, Victor is actually based on a cat who my aunt had, a very giant rust-colored one-eyed grouch of a cat. So yeah. They definitely had an influence on
that. Which writers or artists, even kind of sequential fiction, whether comic strips or comic books, kind of serve as a good inspiration for you? Are there any?
I actually honestly was not much into comics before I started drawing comics. It might show in my style. It's a little bit unorthodox, my panel layouts and so forth. But probably the biggest one, might sound silly, but Calvin and Hobbes was a huge influence on the way I draw. I think that was the one and only comic I ever really read as a kid. And then as I, of course, have gotten more into comics, I've latched on to Alan Moore and things of that nature. I'm not going to pronounce his name right, Kiyoishi, who does the Flight comic anthologies, has been a big influence. I got to meet him in October, actually, when I did a little book tour in Italy, and that's been a very enlightening and educational experience.
I'd heard it was initially published in Italian, actually. Yes. How did that come about? I assume you live in the U.S., but...
Yeah, it just happened to be the first publisher who came along who had agreeable terms. It was an Italian language publisher, so I went with that. And I mean, I did have some reservations about it. It seemed a little odd to go and publish in Italy before doing it in the States, but they came forward with basically a deal I couldn't pass up, so...
There was a separate publisher in the U.S. then that got a hold of it?
Yeah. It was an offer I couldn't refuse. They didn't kill any horses.
What kind of work do you do in the video game industry?
I started there as a 2D artist, graphic artist, doing mostly promotional illustrations and website art. From there I moved into 3D art, so a lot of character modeling from the concept art phase through to the modeling, texturing, rigging, and animation. And now I work as an art director, so I spend a lot of time managing artists as well.
I didn't realize you were an art director, actually. That's really cool.
Do you have any like funny fanboy stories where someone has stalked you or something?
Oh boy, I had one guy who proposed to me over my voicemail.
Talk about you. Shut up.
He found my phone number at my office, and I guess he must have cycled through all the extensions and finally found my voicemail and left a long rambling marriage proposal there. So that was interesting.
That's flattering.
If anyone does that, I'm calling the Dorsai on them. Anyone else have any other questions?
Will you marry me? No. That's good.
I'm very flattered, but I'm...
Actually, before you started on this whole project, had you known much about like the furry fandom, or had you been in...
Yeah, I had actually been posting artwork on YERF and things like that back in the day.
On
actually,
DA, I think.
That's, huh?
Oh, I'm sorry, just mentioning on DA, I remember seeing...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, DeviantArt and YERF was where I actually started, where I first, I think, happened across the furry community in general, and that's actually how I ended up with my job. Posting artwork on the internet, they found my work there, and they sent me an invitation for a job interview, so that was kind of interesting.
the internet works.
Yeah, it does. It's definitely the best tool out there for an artist to promote themselves.
When you began Lackadaisy Cast, when did you actually come up with the concept for being the 1920s theme with Prohibition?
I think my particular style of humor is just kind of a little bit slapstick and hedonistic, and I think that just drew me in. The prospect of making characters who fit into this really wacky world that was actually has a basis in reality. I think was just appealing to me, and I think it's an easy decade to romanticize as well. So.
When it came to that, I mean, was it probably sparked by when you moved to St. Louis?
Yes. My house was built in that period, and so when I started researching history, that era, it just caught on, I think.
Great, thank you.
Hi again.
Hi.
Being in the game industry, do you play any particular video games or PC games?
Honestly, since I started working in the game industry, I've played fewer and fewer games. It's just a matter of lack of time. I do tend to test out various games. We always have to keep up with what everybody else is doing and see what the competition is up to. But probably the last game I played with put any amount of time into was BioShock. I like FPS games because they aren't too addicted. You can finish it and you don't get too addicted to something like World of Warcraft or whatever.
You're coming out with a sequel.
Yeah. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Thanks.
And I know you've done a lot of study on the dialects of the time periods, but you have the two characters from New Orleans in it, and they seem like they're kind of not part of the. I guess I've actually got two questions. First, why two characters from New Orleans and St. Louis?
I visited New Orleans not long ago and was very struck with the overall personality of that era and the era as well. But I think I've also got family members who are Acadian, and my grandfather spoke Canadian French when he was a child. So I think just a little bit of family history in there and some interest in New Orleans culture.
But did you learn the dialects from your family, or is there somewhere you went to actually find out?
I actually have had to purchase a book on Cajun French.
Right.
It's been a little difficult writing their dialect, to be honest, because I don't want to be insulting by writing it and doing it wrong. But at the same time, I think it adds a little bit of flavor to the characters, so I enjoy doing things like that.
Yeah, I did notice you do seem to try to be very authentic in everything that you write in there, and just as another question that came to my mind, is that made doing it more difficult or more enjoyable to actually do the research?
Yeah, it does make it. It does require more research doing that sort of thing, because there's always somebody. No matter what you're BSing, someone's going to catch you. There's always somebody out there who's a geek in that area, and they'll know. So I do try to be very careful and try to do my research, and if I can't find the resources to do something, I won't do it, just because I think it's kind of insulting to your audience to assume that they'll just accept that something is okay, even though it's not quite authentic enough. There are a few things in there that are anachronisms, but I openly admit to them. So.
Hello. For anyone who's interested in researching the period for themselves, could you recommend any of the resources that you use?
Sure. I use a lot of, for clothing and things, old clippings from Sears catalogs and things of that nature. They compile them into books, and you can actually find them really cheap on Amazon. I found a lot of my books that way, actually. They're out of print, but they have some rather obscure information about both the area and the time period. I'd say just go look on Amazon, look up 1920s stuff, and find people who are selling them used for $2-3, and do that. I've got a big Art Deco book that I really love. You can find it probably at any Barnes & Noble or Borders bookstore. It's a big gray, silver-colored book full of Art Deco furniture, artwork, and things of that nature. I've got a book on Model A and Model T cars. I can't think of the name of the book, but it's another one that you'll easily find at any bookstore. There's also a series of little small paperback books that every city puts out, actually, about its own history. So if you're trying to do something that's local to a certain spot, you can generally go to the bookstore and go to their local section, and they'll have those books. They're usually they're actually sepia colored because they're all full of old photos and things of the area. But I know Detroit has one. I know St. Louis has one. New Orleans, pretty much any city you can think of, and it's just full of very history specific to the area.
When doing art for video games, do you prefer more of the realistic style or more of the toony style? And is either really more rewarding?
Each of them is rewarding in their own way. I think I enjoy kind of the sort of monomania of getting into a really detailed, realistic drawing. At the same time, it's nice to let loose a little bit afterwards and draw something cartoony and light. Both of them I enjoy, so, for different reasons.
You also have any other questions for Tracey? Great. Well, thank you very much for answering the questions for everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Once again, she's going to be in the dealer's room for pretty much the whole weekend, right? So make sure to come by, say hi, patronize her table. So, so thank you very much for being here.